welcome to Doc Talk. I'm Dr. Imad G, and we welcome you to the program today. A very exciting program about the immune system, our genius army of defense. And last couple of weeks, we did a couple of great shows that had great feedback. One was about recovering from organized medicine, recovering from the programming of thinking of health only one way. Then our last program last week was from cell to birth, the incredible journey, the very dramatic journey of a human being in progress in the way they're designed, and incredible DNA immune system. And today we're going to elaborate on the immune system. We saw last week how the DNA has 300 billion letters involved in terms of expressing who we are, like a computer program, but much, much more sophisticated. And we saw how if you actually put one letter per second for 8 hours a day, it would take you 50 years to encrypt the immune system the way that it's designed. So today, we welcome you. We're going to be launching right into this very detailed, fascinating program on the immune system and the genius that it is. So here we are. Without any further ado, we're going to get started here on the immune system. So I entitled it the immune system, our genius army of defense. And you will see it's very, very much an army. And just to recap from last week, we see from day one, right from the first cell that's fertilized, the zygote, we already see that within the sac that the unborn is already producing macrophages, which is the first line of defense. Now, the liver, within the first few weeks, already starts to produce various white blood cells as part of the immune system. The intestines are part of the immune system. This is all before the child even sees light of day, all happening within the uterus. Then T cells are formed. We'll talk much more detail about T cells today. Then we have the lymphatic channels that are developing as part of our immune system. The bone marrow within the first 8 weeks starts to produce T cells, B cells, all white blood cells, and it integrates with the spleen as well. So that's kind of a very brief recap. And we saw that within the first 40 weeks of the gestational period, and then up to 3 months afterward, the mother actually passes on her own antibodies to protect the unborn, and then the child for the first 3 months it has extra protection immunologically from the mother. So let's move on now to look at specifically the thymus. Of course, was also part of the immune system, and all interact together. So the immune system is basically very sophisticated and has multiple cells involved, and it works through the lymphatic channels throughout the body. The lymph nodes follow the pathway of the arteries and the veins. It works with the spleen and lymphatic channels, and it's actually very sophisticated. Now, it has an army of soldiers, of captains, of suicide bombers, and of weapons and artillery and intelligence as well. So it's very, very sophisticated system, as you'll see. So we'll see here, this is kind of a brief recap of what happens when the body is invaded. So this is called an antigen. Any invader foreign to the body that could inflict damage on the human cells, could potentially kill us, is called an antigen. Now, the antigen can be a virus. We heard a lot in the last 3 years about viruses attacking the body, but it can also be bacteria, and it can also be our own cells as they mutate into cancer cells. So all these are threats to the body and mobilize the immune system. And we'll see in more detail in terms of an animation of the immune system. But for now, this is the first line of defense when the body encounters an antigen, an attack on it. The first line of defense are the soldiers. Now, the soldiers are the macrophages. So these are white blood cells, and they're the first line of defense, as we'll see very shortly. The second line of defense are suicide bombers. So these actually work together to attack the antigen, to attack the intruder, that which threatens our human body. So suicide bombers are the neutrophils. They're also white blood cells. Now, there are actually bombers. The bombers are the C or C proteins are the actual bombers, and they're also a very important part of the immune system, the initial response. So it's actually complement proteins. Sorry, it just escaped me for a second there. So C protein is complement protein that are basically like liquid bombers, if you will. And then we have the intelligence. The intelligence officers are the dendritic cells. So these are actually brilliant cells that are part of the program to mobilize the immune system and actually bring it to the next level of defense, which is what I call the enhanced line of defense. You might call this the booster, the natural booster of our immune system. When the first line of defense has not completely eliminated the attack, then the enhanced line of defense, or the so-called, what I call booster system, starts coming into play. And there are captains in the booster system. The captains are the T cells. The T cells are, there's initial T cells that are just formed, and then there are helper T cells that actually work in conjunction with the next line of cells we'll talk about. And then there are memory T cells that remember the antigen, remember that intruder, and any variation of that intruder for any future attacks are ready to launch the attack on the intruder much more quickly. And then there are the heavy weapons. So these are the heavy artillery that are mobilized as an enhanced line of defense. And these are called the B cells. Now, B cells will then create plasma cells, which are basically part of a continuum to develop antibodies. Now, antibodies are the weapon of mass destruction, if you will, against the intruder. So these are the heavy weapons and artillery against the intruders. So pretty amazing. I mean, I've really simplified it, but this is really, in essence, the immune system as it protects us, as it is our army to protect us against intruders, whether they be viruses, bacteria, or cancer cells. And these work in conjunction with one another as well. So let's move on and look at a diagrammatic or animation of the immune system. And we'll take this from the first line of defense, which is the macrophages and the neutrophils. So as soon as there's an intruder, actually the body's natural cells will produce a signal. We'll send out a chemical signal to mobilize the immune system. Say, hey, we have an alert here. We have a problem. The macrophages come along, much like an octopus. They'll basically grab the attacker, engulf the attacker, and destroy them. Again, the first soldier that comes into play is a macrophage. And this happens within seconds. And they kill like an octopus, and they can kill, each macrophage can kill up to 100 bacteria each. Now, the next line of defense is the neutrophils. Now, the neutrophils are basically like suicide bombers. They live to kill. That's what they do. They live to kill, and then they self-destruct. They shoot deadly chemicals at the invader or devour them. Sometimes they actually will even explode and release deadly chemicals, like pretty much like a suicide bomber. So these are, see, this just basically explodes before death and releases a weapon of mass destruction, if you will, to attack any of the invaders as well. And then you have the bloodstream that actually gets more brisk as the immune system is mobilized. And then you have complement proteins. Now, these are like liquid weapons, if you will. And that's where you start to see inflammatory responses in the body, such as swelling, redness, heat. That's largely from the increased blood flow and the mobilization of the C proteins or complement proteins. So we're still at the first line of defense. And here we have now the intelligence of the immune system, or the dendritic cells. So these dendritic cells are absolutely fascinating. They'll actually engulf the attacker, the bacteria, or the viruses, and they'll cut them up into fragments. And they go along the bloodstream now. And now they're looking for the next line of defense, which is the enhanced line of defense. They go through the entire lymphatic channels throughout the entire body, looking for the next line of defense, which is a T cell. So they're trying to find a T cell that will actually be specific to attack that particular virus or bacteria. So they go along, essentially feeling along in the bloodstream all the various T cells that are available to it, until finally it finds one that is particularly ready to attack that antigen. So it picks that one T cell. It says, okay, this is going to be the one that's going to attack our invader. Now, keep in mind that T cells are capable of attacking various types of bacteria and viruses and mutations of these bacteria and viruses. And these have been mobilized for centuries in terms of the human existence. And they're able to basically detect and kill a whole slew of bacteria and viruses, of course, including coronaviruses. And we know that with coronaviruses, there's a over 99.5% recovery rate in healthy adults when they're attacked with coronaviruses, such as COVID-19. So now we have finished the first line of defense, and we're just starting into the enhanced line of defense. So the enhanced line of defense will include the T cells and the B cells as well. So the T cells have now been activated by the dendritic cells. The immune system has a perfect weapon against any possible disease in the universe. So literally, there are billions upon billions of helper T cells that have weapons against every possible enemy that attacks the body. And this is even without introducing any potential like vaccination. And again, we're not going to get into heavy detail about the natural versus immunization with vaccinations for this episode, but we will address it. We'll address it toward the end. So now they're basically, the T cells now are chosen by the dendritic cell. That's the intelligence system. It's decided which T cells are going to be mobilized. And now the T cells will actually start to multiply now. So basically form a new army specific for the antigen or the attacker. Now they will clone itself until thousands upon thousands of T cells are available, and they divide themselves into two groups. So the first group will go into the area of attack, the battlefield, if you will. So basically now they're actually mobilizing and stimulating the macrophages, which have started to get a little bit sluggish for the initial response. So essentially they're like a steroid to the macrophage, and the macrophage now gets more mobilized, more active and more aggressive, and goes toward the antigen, the viruses, and starts to destroy them much more aggressively with the help of the T cell. And hence it's called the T helper cell, or helper T cell, if you will. So that's the one set of T cells goes right to the field, the battlefield. And the other T cells go to the enhanced immune system and they find B cells. Now, B cells now have been chosen by the T cells. This is the second group of cells. And these are literally the antibody factories. They are like super weapons. Their antibodies are like super weapons that look like tiny crabs with two pincers that grab the enemy. So now you have mobilized, the first line of defense is still active. Now you have a second line of defense with B cells and T cells. And now you have basically the body's defense system engulfing the enemy and destroying it. And the body is successful in over 99.9% of cases of attacks. And a lot of times we don't even realize this is happening. We don't even have any symptoms. And so that's the incredible thing about the immune system. Much of this happens without even our awareness. So you have these billions of cells every day that are being formed to defend us from cancer cells, from viruses, from bacteria, and we don't even realize that it's happening. So the final phase, it's not over yet, because after that initial battle, now you have the next intelligent planning, which is the T and B cell memory. So the T and B cells, many of them will die off after that battlefield, but many more will start to actually mobilize into memory T cells and B cells. So now they're prepared and they have literally like a computer memory ready for any further attacks from that virus, bacteria, or cancer cells, or any variation of it. And that's why many studies show that we have immunity against previous bacteria and viruses, but not only from the original one, but even any mutations of it, the B cells and the T cells will still have memory for that and will have a much more robust response the second time they try to invade our body and attack us. So just want to ask the question now, how effective is natural immunity? So now we have billions of cells. Just going to talk to you here for 1 second. So now we have billions of cells in the first line. So we have our soldiers, which are macrophages. We have suicide bombers, which are neutrophils. We have the intelligence army, which is the dendritic cells. And then we have the second line of defense. The dendritic cells mobilize the T cells, helper T cells then mobilize the B cells. And all this is first line and then enhanced immunity. And then you have the memory T cells and the memory B cells to be prepared for any future attacks. So we've had a lot of controversy in the media, particularly in the last 3 years, with respect to natural immunity versus immunization and vaccination. And so you can see already there's such an incredibly complex system that's ready to attack any virus, any bacteria, or variations thereof. And that's just why humans have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years without us dying off from infections early on in our lifetime. And most of us will live to a full ripe age. And it's because of a robust immune system. We're constantly encountering invaders. We're constantly encountering new viruses, new bacteria, and so forth. Now, we won't get into the politics of vaccination. I think we all know about that, about how profit can contaminate our interpretation or critical ethical appraisal of literature. But how effective is natural immunity? Well, there's so many studies. Dr. Peter McCullough has quoted many studies, has done a meta-analysis of natural immunity and the effectiveness of natural immunity, not only from previously encountered viruses that may have been even years ago, but also from future attacks. Natural immunity in vast majority of people is extremely effective at fighting all kinds of coronaviruses, bacteria, and even cancer cells, which is why most of us, thankfully, don't get cancer cells, but sadly, many of us will. Now, in another session, we're going to talk about how to strengthen our immune system. How to strengthen our immune system with things such as nutrition and sleep and even emotional and spiritual factors play a big role. Community plays a big role, believe it or not, in enhancing the immune system. Conversely, negative emotions can actually suppress T cells and B cells. And we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. There's actually studies from Duke University that show that if you have anger, if you have chronic anger or unforgiveness, you literally suppress your antibodies and T cells. They actually have taken levels that have shown that it's depressed among those who carry negative emotions. So it's very important to guard our immune system with respect to our emotional health, our rest, our nutrition, and so forth. But in spite of that, in spite of maybe wrong decisions that we make with nutrition and sleep deprivation and even negative emotions, the immune system is still effective in most cases, but it can be hindered by negative lifestyle choices and negative emotions. And so let's go on and address this question now. How effective is natural immunity? Well, there's so many studies on this, but one during the COVID era, if you will, showed that in Nature, which is a very reputable journal, Kids and COVID, why young immune systems are still on top. And this article quotes several studies that show that natural immunity is in fact very robust. In fact, in children, natural immunity and the immune response can be as much as twice as effective as in adults. Now, this is breaking news. Breaking news, literally just out last week, February the 16th, just last week, a study from the Lancet Journal said that past SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 infection, protection against reinfection, systematic review, and meta-analysis. Now, a meta-analysis is a combination of multiple studies. In this particular study, they actually looked at 65 individual studies in a meta-analysis, combined them together, studies from 19 countries. And this is what they found. Protection from reinfection of coronavirus equaled or was higher than that obtained by vaccines. So natural immunity was equal or higher than that from vaccines. And there are actually other studies that show that natural immunity is actually far superior to vaccines. In the case of COVID messenger RNA vaccines, there are several studies now that show it has negative efficacy. It actually makes you more susceptible to infection. So the verdict is really out in several studies, in this particular one, including 65 study combination. 19 countries found that protection, natural protection with natural immunity was equal or higher than with vaccines. And there are other studies that show that consistently. It's actually higher than vaccines with natural immune response. Now, I asked this provocative question: will natural immunity benefits get media coverage? And this is part of the problem, because we have this issue and this complexity of the pharmaceutical industry, the profits that come from vaccination schedules and vaccines that can contaminate our ability to clearly analyze and do proper ethical critical analysis of the literature. And this point was actually raised by Bill Maher in a recent study, like literally in a recent episode of his program. He actually challenges one of the mainstream media executives on his show about the fact that this may not be reported. Why is natural immunity and the strength of natural immunity not reported by the media? And here's a little clip of it that's actually very interesting.
Because I saw in the paper today, kind of a big story, I think. I wonder how much it's going to get covered in the liberal media, because it's about how natural immunity, they did a giant study, 65 countries, or maybe something like 65 countries, many different studies. They looked at them all. Natural immunity, as good or better than the vaccine. Something I've been saying since the beginning, and I get called an anti-vaxxer. That's not an anti-vaxxer. This is the kind of thing, my problem with the media from both sides is not that you guys lie. It's that you tell me your side of the story that you want me to know. You don't tell me the whole story. I'd be curious as to how much play this story gets.
So very interesting and very provocative question that Bill Maher asked the mainstream media executive is, will this paper, this meta-analysis just released last week, will it get media coverage? Because this is very pivotal to the whole question of vaccination, messenger RNA injections, and the efficacy of natural immunity versus immunization by vaccines. And well, we'll see. This should be breaking news. It's 65 papers, a meta-analysis in 19 countries, now showing that natural immunity is plenty and probably is superior, very superior to injection with artificial messenger RNA modalities. So that's going to be the big question now is, will this get coverage? Because this is one of multiple papers that are showing the brisk response of natural immunity. Now, we are going to address specifically vaccine schedules and what evidence there is or isn't for the whole vaccination schedules. Certainly, the last 3 years has been very provocative, and many people that have accepted wholeheartedly, blindly, the vaccine schedule in children are now questioning it. So many people that are actually pro-vaxxers are now anti-vaxxers, if you will. They're intelligent people just analyzing, well, what's happening here? Why is natural immunity suppressed? Why is natural immunity not covered by media, not covered by public health officers, not covered by government, and not covered by schools? The brisk response, as we saw today, from the complex first line and enhanced immunity is absolutely remarkable. Literally billions of cells comprised of soldiers, suicide bombers, intelligence officers, weapons of mass destruction against invaders, and intelligence officers. I mean, this should get major media coverage, but it may not. It may not, and we will see. Time will tell whether this kind of paper will become breaking news. Congratulations to Bill Maher, very honest and credible, and trying to get both sides covered equally and fairly. So I hope you enjoyed this overview. It's basically immunology 101 covered in 25 minutes. So I kind of went very quickly. I hope that you kind of were able to get that together and grasp it in terms of the complexity of it and how the immune system works in unison together with all the various cells, basically supporting one another, enhancing one another's function. So I hope that you enjoyed this program. Next week, I would like to talk about how to analyze literature, how to do a medical literature search, how to look for papers that are well designed, and how to rule out papers that are poorly designed. So if you have a clinical question, I'll just go through what I've learned in terms of clinical research and the papers that I was able to publish in terms of how to come up with a high quality paper that asks any question that you might have about health, any question you might have about medical intervention, any question you might have about nutrition, or any other issue as well. So we'll be talking about medical literature, how to evaluate medical literature. And then the following week, 2 weeks from now, we're going to use that information to analyze the vaccine schedules and other interventions as well. So there is a lot to cover. And then I do have a nutritionist as well, professional nutritionist that's actually won awards, Elisa Herman, who will be one of our guests coming up in the next few weeks. We'll talk about nutrition, how to strengthen our immune system with nutrition. And so we have a lot of really exciting shows coming up. And as we conclude, I just want to bring to your attention as well a couple of things. One is, and I mentioned this last week, I do this voluntarily, and I certainly really appreciate your support. You can send a donation to doctalkwithdrg@gmail.com. My dream, my passion is to do this full time. But in order to do it full time, I do ask for your support. And it can be any amount. It can be like $5, $10. Anything will help in order to build the foundation for being able to do this full time. Because I put hours of preparation. I love this. But in order to do it full time, I do need your support. And for any donation above $60, I will send you shipped book Life in Medicine and the children speak. So that is actually less. That will be less investment than if you bought both books directly. It would be $60 donation, and you get both books. If you bought the books, and then paid for shipping and paid for the books, it'll end up being more than that donation. But anything that you're able to contribute certainly will help me to continue with this program. I've had great feedback, but in order to do it on an ongoing basis, I do ask for your support. So this is Dr. Imad G reporting. We hope you enjoyed this program, Doc Talk with Dr. G on the immune system, the incredible genius of the army that protects us. So have a wonderful evening, and you take care. I will see you next time.